Mark and Rachel Whitmore were the picture of suburban perfection, until an Uber Eats delivery girl named Lila Monroe stepped through their front gate and into a secret affair that would spiral into obsession, stalking, and a murder that no one saw coming. Behind the closed doors of their quiet home, loyalty unraveled, lies multiplied, and a dark game began, one that would end with a body, a vanished suspect, and a town desperate for answers. In the heart of Orlando, nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac shaded by oak trees and trimmed hedges, stood the Holloway residence. It was the kind of home that invited admiration, a red brick facade, flower beds in full bloom, and a pristine lawn that always looked freshly cut. It gave off an air of stability and success. Inside lived Mark and Rachel Holloway, a couple who by all accounts had it all. 8 years of marriage, a 7-year-old son named Eli, and careers that made them financially comfortable. Mark was a respected real estate broker known for selling million-dollar homes, while Rachel was an elementary school teacher whose students adored her. Together they were the textbook example of the American dream. At school events, Rachel was the mother other moms asked for parenting advice. Mark was the dad who showed up with fresh donuts and a confident smile. Social media only added to their flawless image, vacation photos from the Bahamas, heartfelt anniversary posts, and snapshots of backyard barbecues. It was the kind of life people scrolled past with envy. But what those photos didn't show was how hollow things had become behind closed doors. There had been a shift, subtle at first. Mark started coming home later than usual, blaming work calls or last-minute showings. Rachel noticed his phone was always face down, always locked. The once warm conversations between them had become routine exchanges, logistics about dinner, school pickups, or bills. Rachel, once so secure in their relationship, began to feel invisible. But she chalked it up to the demands of adulthood. Who didn't go through rough patches in marriage? What she didn't know was that Mark had been feeling trapped for years. The excitement that once filled their relationship had faded, replaced by predictability. He craved something he couldn't even name, something thrilling, something reckless. Though he loved his son and respected Rachel in his own way, a part of him wanted to escape the perfect life they had built together. But instead of facing that truth, he buried it deep, hiding it behind professional charm and plastic smile. It wasn't just emotional distance creeping in, it was something darker. Rachel had caught him lying about small things. A dinner he said he had with a client that turned out not to exist, or a credit card charge at a bar he claimed he hadn't visited. Still, she convinced herself it was harmless. They were busy. Maybe he just needed space. Mark's coworkers began to whisper about him. Nothing serious, just offhand remarks about how he seemed distracted lately, or how he lingered too long during lunches. His once sharp performance had dulled. One assistant mentioned seeing him parked outside a hotel downtown during office hours alone in his car. But the rumors never reached Rachel. In her world, Mark was just tired, maybe overworked. It didn't occur to her that something or someone else might be consuming his attention. The neighborhood too played its part in the illusion. People nodded and smiled, oblivious to the unraveling happening just feet away. No one suspected that the seemingly happy home with the white shutters and hanging porch swing was hiding a slow-burning tension, and certainly, no one predicted the violent storm that was on its way. The strange thing was, it all started with something so mundane, a dinner delivery, a forgotten night when Rachel worked late and Mark decided to order in. It should have meant nothing, but that single moment, an online food order, a knock at the door, a girl with a paper bag would ignite a chain reaction that no one could stop. And as the first ember of betrayal began to flicker inside that house, no one noticed. No one heard the warning whispers or felt the shift in the air, but something had changed forever. And by the time anyone realized, blood would already be on the floor. It was a Wednesday night when Mark Holloway placed the order. Nothing unusual, just a late dinner after a long day of juggling clients and traffic. Rachel had texted that she'd be staying late at school for parent-teacher conferences, and Eli was already asleep upstairs, his nightlight casting gentle shadows across his bedroom walls. Mark scrolled through his Uber Eats app, half watching a muted sports show on TV, and finally settled on Thai food from a place downtown he hadn't tried before. The order was routine: a pad Thai spring rolls and a Thai iced tea. He barely gave it a thought, but when the doorbell rang 28 minutes later, everything began to shift. On the other side of the door stood a young woman he didn't recognize. She wasn't the usual college kid or tired part-time driver he'd come to expect. She looked like she didn't belong on that doorstep, too made up, too confident, too interested in his face rather than the signature screen on her phone. She introduced herself with a smile, the kind of smile that lingered too long. Mark noticed her, really noticed. She was in her early 20s, slim, with long black hair pulled back in a ponytail, and just a hint of something dangerous in her eyes. Her name, according to the app and the tiny name tag clipped to her jacket, was Lila, but she said it like it was more than just a name, like it was a day. He tipped her in cash, a habit he claimed was old school, but really it was just an excuse for interaction. She thanked him, their fingers brushing briefly as he handed over the bills. She left, but not without glancing over her shoulder. Just once, just enough. Mark didn't think much of it at first. He ate his dinner, turned off the TV and went to bed. But the next day the image of her lingered in his mind. Something about her felt unpredictable, raw, unfiltered, the exact opposite of the life he had built, the one filled with polite conversations, daily routines and silent resentment. That night, without even realizing it, he ordered from the same restaurant again, and somehow by coincidence or design, Lila was the one who delivered. This time, she didn't leave right away. She asked if the food had been okay last time, if he had any recommendations. Her voice was playful but edged with confidence. Mark invited her to step inside for a moment while he grabbed the cash. She did. She stood in his foyer, eyes scanning the hallway, the family photos, the quiet house that held so many carefully placed secrets. He handed her the tip. She thanked him again, and when she left this time, she didn't glance back. She smiled knowingly, like something unspoken had already passed between them. The routine began. Mark started ordering more often, always in the evening, always when Rachel was working late. Sometimes he tried different restaurants, just to test whether Lila would show. Somehow she always did. When she didn't have a scheduled shift, she would swap with another driver. Mark never asked how she managed it. He didn't want to break the illusion. Soon the deliveries weren't about food, they were about the thrill, the anticipation of her knock, the moment their eyes met, the subtle flirtation growing bolder with each visit. He started timing his orders to moments when he knew she'd have time to linger. She began dressing differently, tighter jeans, a crop top hidden under her jacket, lip gloss that sparkled under the porch light. They barely touched, barely said anything inappropriate, but the energy between them was unmistakable. Rachel didn't notice yet. She was exhausted, distracted and trusting. Mark convinced himself that nothing was really happening, that flirting wasn't cheating, that curiosity wasn't crime, but deep down he knew what he was doing. He was feeding something dangerous, something that hadn't yet revealed its full appetite. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that Lila wasn't just another bored delivery driver looking for attention. She was something else entirely, and she wasn't playing by the rules, not his, not Rachel's, and not society's. The game had started, but only one of them knew how far it would go. What began as harmless tension quickly morphed into something neither of them could stop. The flirtation between Mark and Lila didn't stay at the front door for long. A week later, it crossed the threshold. It was late on a Monday when the first real boundary was broken. Mark had ordered dinner again, though he wasn't hungry. Lila showed up just before 9 p.m. She didn't knock this time. She texted him, instead, "I'm here." Mark opened the door before the message had even finished delivering. She stepped inside like she'd done it 100 times before. No hesitation, no questions. That night she didn't bring a food bag. It started in the kitchen, a moment that seemed to stretch forever, a pause, a glance, the world quieting around them. They kissed. No words were exchanged, just the sound of their breathing, the weight of silence, and the distant hum of the refrigerator. The moment burned itself into Mark's memory, leaving a mark far deeper than he expected. From that point on, everything moved quickly. They began meeting regularly, not just during delivery shift. Mark started sneaking away from work in the middle of the day. He'd send Lila the address of an empty listing, homes he was showing later that week. Large, echoing rooms with clean carpets and freshly painted walls became their hideouts. They didn't leave behind clues, they were carefully controlled, or so Mark believed. Lila had a wildness to her that drew him in. She was unpredictable. One day she showed up at a property with a bottle of wine in her back. Another time, she brought a small speaker and played music as she danced barefoot across the living room of a $1 million home. Mark was mesmerized. She was a break from reality, a jolt of adrenaline in his carefully managed life. He told himself it wasn't serious, that it would end, that he had control, but Lila had no intention of keeping things temporary. She began asking questions about his family, casual at first. How old was his son? What school did he go to? What kind of person was Rachel? At first, Mark laughed them off, but the questions kept coming. She wanted to know where Rachel worked, when she came home, if she was suspicious, and then she started showing up unexpectedly. Once, she appeared at the grocery store, where Rachel often shopped, just to watch. Another time, she left a note on Mark's car windshield. "Wish I was riding with you instead." That one chilled him. Still, he didn't stop. He didn't walk away. Their affair became routine, but there was nothing normal about it. Lila's grip on Mark tightened with each encounter. She became possessive, sending him texts, late at night, sometimes dozens in a row. If he didn't respond, she accused him of avoiding her. If he took too long to reply, she threatened to show up at his house. Once, she left a pair of her earrings in the passenger seat of his car on purpose. Mark panicked and tossed them in a gas station trash bin before Rachel could notice, but Rachel was noticing other things. She began keeping track of his schedule. His stories weren't adding up. He was irritable, distant, and more than anything, he seemed anxious, always checking his phone. She didn't know the full picture yet, but she felt it. Something was wrong. Meanwhile, Lila was growing more obsessed. She started talking about the future, what it would be like to live together, to raise Eli as her own. She laughed when she said it, but Mark did. He started pulling away, trying to create distance. But with every step back, Lila only came closer, more insistent, more invasive. And then came the day he told her they had to stop, that it was getting out of hand, that he loved his family and needed to fix what he had broken. But Lila didn't take rejection well, not before, not now, and certainly not from someone she believed belonged to her. In her mind, she hadn't just fallen in love, she had invested herself fully, body, mind and heart, and when she looked at Mark Holloway, she didn't see a man having an affair, she saw a future husband, and in her world, there was no room for a wife already in the picture. Rachel Holloway wasn't the kind of woman to jump to conclusions. She believed in facts, in order, in giving people the benefit of the. For years that approach had served her well in her classroom, in her marriage, and in life. But lately, something felt off. Mark had changed, not in ways most people would notice, but in ways she felt deep in her bones. He was always on edge, distant, yet defensive, quick to anger over little things, and strangely protective of his phone. She began to see patterns. Nights when he claimed to be stuck at showings that didn't appear on his work calendar, mysterious expenses on their joint credit card, small charges at hotels she didn't recognize, coffee shops, miles from his office, unfamiliar restaurants during hours he was supposedly working. He never wanted to be intimate anymore. When she reached for him, he pulled away gently, offering tired smiles and vague excuses about stress or lack of sleep. But Rachel's instincts had started whispering, something darker, something dishonest. One afternoon, while doing laundry, she found the first solid clue. Mark had left a receipt in his jacket pocket, one she suspected he hadn't meant to keep. It was from a hotel across town, dated just 4 days earlier. He had told her he was at a client dinner that night. The receipt didn't lie. Rachel felt her heart pound, her palms sweat. Her mind filled with questions she didn't want to ask herself, let alone her husband, but she didn't confront him, not yet. Rachel knew confronting a liar without proof only taught them how to lie better, so instead, she began to collect evidence, quietly. She downloaded a tracking app onto his phone while he was sleeping, disguising it as a software update. Over the next few weeks, she studied his locations in real time. She watched him park outside houses he wasn't supposed to be showing, watched him drive in circles, stop in alleyways, and linger at unfamiliar addresses. One address in particular came up repeatedly, a short-term rental on the edge of the city, a place with no connection to his listings. She took screenshots of everything, locations, texts, timestamps. Then she checked the Uber Eats history on his account. She hadn't meant to, but curiosity overtook her. That's when she saw it. Order after order from the same Thai restaurant. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Rachel scrolled through the delivery logs, and found one name over and over, Lila Monroe. At first the name meant nothing, but after a little digging, Rachel found her on social media. Lila's profile was open, carelessly filled with selfies in fast food uniforms, bathroom mirrors and cryptic captions, about love, lies and revenge. Rachel's stomach turned. She clicked through photos, studying the young woman's face. A stranger, someone who didn't belong in their world, and yet she was now deeply embedded in it. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed next to Mark, who snored softly beside her, unaware that the walls around him were starting to collapse. She imagined scenarios, confrontations, fights, tears. But instead of reacting, Rachel chose a different path. She started documenting everything. She made a folder on her laptop, password protected, where she stored the screenshots, the receipts and her growing suspicion. She even printed out photos of Lila, highlighting the timestamps where they aligned with Mark's tracked locations, and all the while Mark remained clueless. He thought he was playing a clever game, keeping both lives separate, but he had no idea Rachel was steps ahead, quietly closing. She wasn't preparing for a fight, she was preparing for an escape. But even as Rachel gathered evidence, she didn't realize someone else was also watching, someone who had already felt the shift in Mark's behavior, someone who was dangerously possessive and prone to drastic decisions. Lila Monroe wasn't oblivious to what was happening. She knew Mark was slipping away, and she wasn't going to let it happen. Not quietly, not peacefully. Unbeknownst to Rachel, Lila had already taken her own precautions. She had placed a small hidden recording device in Mark's car, tucked beneath the passenger seat. Weeks earlier, she had listened to every word of the last conversation he had with his wife. She knew Rachel had discovered the affair, and now with jealousy and paranoia festering like a disease in her mind, Lila began planning her next move, because in her eyes, there were only two women in Mark's life, and only one could survive. The first time Rachel saw Lila in person, it was entirely by accident, or at least that's what she told herself. She had gone to the Thai restaurant listed on the delivery history, under the pretense of picking up food for a school event. It was a calculated risk, a way to turn suspicion into confirmation. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, maybe just a face to attach to the chaos unraveling her life, but as she stood near the register, scanning the faces of the workers behind the counter, she saw her, Lila. She was younger than Rachel expected, prettier too, in a rough, effortless way. Her dark hair was pulled up messily, and her lips were glossed in the same shimmer Rachel had seen in the social media photos. There was an energy about her, bold, watchful, a little too self-aware for someone delivering noodles. Rachel felt her breath catch in her throat as Lila glanced up from the tablet screen, and made direct eye contact. There was a flicker, just a second of recognition, or maybe it was something else. Challenge. Lila held the stare too long, as if she already knew who Rachel was, as if she had seen photos, heard recordings, imagined this moment before it happened. Then just as quickly, she turned away, calling out an order number without flinching. Rachel didn't stay to pick up the food. That moment haunted her for days. The confirmation she needed was finally staring her in the face, yet it brought no relief, only dread. It meant this wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a series of bad choices, or fleeting lust. This was something deeper, something dangerous, and the look in Lila's eyes told her the girl wasn't going away quietly. Mark meanwhile was unraveling. He thought he was ending things cleanly with Lila. He had stopped answering her texts, blocked her number, and told himself the silence would hold, but the silence didn't last. Lila started messaging him from other numbers, fake social accounts, even an anonymous email. The tone of her messages shifted, from playful to frantic, from love-drenched to laced with threats. She claimed to be pregnant one day, and suicidal the next. Mark didn't know what to believe, but one thing became clear: she wasn't going to let go. He began looking over his shoulder, checking his rearview mirror more often, avoiding places they used to meet, even deleting his Uber Eats account in a last-ditch attempt to cut the final thread, but the damage was already done. Lila knew too much, and she wasn't finished. Then came the night Rachel found the flash drive. It had been slipped under the seat of her car, wedged into the corner where she kept a bag of teaching supplies. At first, she thought it had been dropped by one of her students, but when she plugged it into her laptop, what she heard chilled her. Recordings, dozens of them, conversations between her and Mark, inside their home, phone calls, arguments, even audio from Eli's bedtime stories. Someone had been listening, for weeks, maybe longer. She covered her mouth as the realization set in. Lila had planted it. The invasion of privacy wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. Rachel no longer felt safe in her own home. Every time she looked at a wall she wondered if there was a camera hidden behind it. Every time she picked up the phone, she questioned if someone else was listening. The pressure became unbearable. She considered going to the police, but what would she say? That her husband's mistress might be stalking her. That someone dropped a flash drive full of recordings into her car without any proof of how it got there. Without a restraining order or a confession, she had nothing solid to stand on, just a gut feeling that something horrific was brewing. Then one morning, Mark's car windshield was shattered. It was parked in their driveway, untouched the night before. There were no signs of theft, just the glass, broken inward, and a single item on the dashboard, one of Lila's earrings. Rachel recognized it immediately. She had seen it once before, in the passenger seat of Mark's car, the one he claimed belonged to a coworker. This wasn't a message, it was a warning. Mark's world was spinning faster than he could control. The affair he thought he had buried was now bubbling to the surface, poisoning everything it touched. He hadn't told Rachel about Lila's messages, or the fake pregnancy scare, or the earring deliberately left on the dashboard. He convinced himself that staying silent would protect everyone, but each decision, each lie, only tightened the noose. He no longer felt like the man who had once juggled houses and happy hours with ease. Now he barely slept. Every creak in the floorboards startled him. Every buzz of his phone sent waves of panic through his chest. Lila had stopped pretending. The messages now arrived like countdowns. Tick-tock, Mark. You'll see me soon. Guess who saw your wife at the Thai place? It was psychological warfare. And Mark was losing. Then one night, Rachel confronted him, not with anger but with evidence. She laid it all out, the receipts, the GPS history, the screenshots, and the flash drive. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled as she spoke. Mark didn't deny it. He couldn't. The truth was exposed like a raw nerve, and with it came a silence so loud it echoed in their once safe home. He tried to explain that it was over, that Lila had turned obsessive, that he had tried to end it, but Rachel's face didn't show sympathy. She had passed the stage of betrayal. Now she was just afraid, not of Mark, but of the girl who had wormed her way into their lives and refused to leave. For the first time, Mark saw Lila through Rachel's eyes, not as a thrill, not as a mistake, but as a threat. The following morning, they agreed to go to the police. Mark brought the texts, the recordings, and the vandalism report about the broken windshield, but the officers didn't seem urgent. They told him that without direct threats, or a history of violence, it would be difficult to build a case. They advised a restraining order, paperwork, wait times. It felt laughable, paper shields against someone who didn't play by the rules. That same day, Rachel received a package at the school where she worked. There was no return address. Inside was a small velvet box containing a necklace, one Mark had given her years ago for their anniversary, but she hadn't seen it in months. She thought she had misplaced it. Now it had reappeared, mailed to her workplace, wrapped in tissue paper soaked faintly with perfume. She didn't tell Mark, not right away. Something in her gut told her that Lila was escalating, testing boundaries, pushing closer, and if they panicked, if they made her feel cornered, she might do something worse. Meanwhile, Mark tried to resume some semblance of normal life. He avoided his usual coffee spots, took different routes to work, made sure to double lock the doors, but one evening, he spotted Lila's car parked half a block from their house. She didn't get out, she just sat there, engine running, staring through the windshield as he pulled into the driveway. Their eyes locked, and then she drove away. The following weekend, Mark and Rachel decided to send Eli to his grandparents' house. It was a quiet decision, made over an unspoken fear that something was going to happen. They didn't know what, only that it was better their son wasn't there to see it.
Then came the real breaking point. Mark arrived home late one night after a showing, and found the back door open. Rachel had been at a conference. The house was nothing looked disturbed, until he entered the kitchen and saw what was waiting for him. On the counter sat 2 wine glasses, one empty, one half full. Beside them, a printed photograph. It was from months ago, he and Lila in one of the houses he'd shown her. She was sitting on the countertop laughing. He was standing between her knees, smiling. Someone had gone through his private files, someone had printed the photo, and someone had been inside their home long enough to pour a drink and wait. Mark backed out of the kitchen slowly. He didn't call the police this time. He called Rachel and told her not to come home, not until they figured out what came next, because whatever line had once existed between fantasy and danger, Lila had just crossed it.
Rachel stayed in a hotel that night. Mark booked it under a different name, paid in cash, and gave her a burner phone. They were no longer pretending this was just a messy affair. It had become something else entirely, an invisible siege. The feeling that someone was always watching, always listening, had taken over every corner of their lives. Rachel kept the curtains closed and slept with the lamp on. Mark, meanwhile, paced through the empty house, jumping at every creak, every shadow. He hadn't heard from Lila in 2 days, and that silence was louder than any message. He checked the cameras he had hastily installed, cheap ones from a local tech store. But the feeds were grainy, full of lag, and gave him little peace of mind. Then around 2:15 a.m., the motion alert went off. The front porch light flickered on. There was no knock, no sound, just a blurry shape standing in front of the door too far away from the camera to identify. Whoever it was, stood there for 6 full minutes without moving, then disappeared into the night. Mark didn't sleep. The next morning, Rachel returned to the house under police escort. She retrieved a few essentials, clothes, schoolwork, a family photo from the mantel. One of the officers did a quick walk-through, but without signs of forced entry or theft, there was little they could do. Mark showed them the photo left in the kitchen, the wine glasses, and the motion footage. The officers nodded, took notes, and left with promises to stay alert. But promises weren't enough. Rachel and Mark were alone again. They decided not to go back to the police. They began keeping their own records. Rachel wrote down every unusual noise, every suspicious vehicle. Mark took screenshots of every anonymous message, even the ones that made no sense, like the one that simply read, "She'll never wear white again," or, "You should have picked me first." They didn't know what to make of it, but it was clear Lila was still watching. Then came the day she broke her silence. Mark received a video, no message, no context. It showed Lila walking through a house, one of the properties he had shown her. She moved slowly through the kitchen, touching the walls, opening cabinets, pausing by the fireplace. The camera was shaky, handheld. At one point she turned it on herself. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between hurt and pure rage. She whispered only one sentence: "This is where you ended it. So this is where it ends." Mark dropped his phone. He knew that house. It was no longer vacant. A young family had moved in a few weeks earlier. He hadn't told Lila, but she had been watching more than he realized. And now she had crossed into strangers' lives, bringing her obsession with her. Mark warned the new tenants anonymously, claiming someone had been seen on the property, but it didn't stop the spiral. The next night someone slashed his tire. The night after that, a rock was thrown through their garage window. No note, no sound, just shattered glass and growing fear. Rachel, already teetering on the edge, began carrying pepper spray in her purse. She changed her route to work Still she felt exposed, like a target had been drawn on her back by someone invisible, but far too close. And then, as if the tension couldn't stretch any tighter, Lila made her boldest move yet. Rachel returned to her hotel room after work, and found the door ajar. Her heart thundered in her chest. She pushed it open slowly, keys clenched between her fingers like makeshift weapons. The room appeared untouched, but something was wrong. She felt it, smelled it. A faint trace of expensive perfume lingered in the air, something neither she nor Mark wore. On the nightstand was a single Polaroid photo. It was of Eli, taken from a distance, clearly without their knowledge. He was on the school playground, mid-laugh, unaware of the camera trained on him. On the back of the photo, scrawled in red ink, were 5 chilling words. "He's part of this too." Rachel dropped to her knees, shaking, the breath knocked out of her. This wasn't just about Mark anymore. It wasn't about revenge or obsession. Lila had shifted her aim. The lines had fully disappeared. Now, it was about destruction of their lives, their family, their very sense of safety. And the worst part, they still had no idea where she was. The photo of Eli changed everything. Up until that moment, Mark and Rachel had been trying to contain the chaos, to manage it like a crisis that might eventually settle. But seeing their son's face caught through the lens of a stalker forced them to abandon any illusions of control. Lila wasn't just obsessed, she was dangerous, and she was getting closer. They pulled Eli out of school the next morning without explanation. Rachel told the administration it was a family emergency, and no one asked further questions. Mark drove him 3 hours away to his sister's home in a quiet rural town, where he could stay safely out of reach. The handoff was quiet and tearful. Eli sensed something was wrong, but didn't ask. He just clung to his dad longer than usual, eyes searching for reassurance that didn't come. Back home, Rachel and Mark turned their lives into lockdown. They cut off all non-essential contact, stopped using social media, and covered every camera and microphone in the house. Rachel even purchased an emergency panic button, something usually marketed to elderly people, just in case. Despite the precautions, the silence that followed was more terrifying than the threats. Days passed without a word from Lila. No texts, no photos, no messages. It felt like the calm before a storm, the moment when nature holds its breath. The unease was suffocating. Every corner of their home held a question. Had she been there? Was she watching now? Then on the 5th night, Rachel's phone lit up at 3:19 a.m. A video message. No sender ID, no subject line. She opened it with trembling fingers. It began with darkness, just muffled breathing and shuffling sounds. Then the camera focused. A small cramped space, a flickering candle, and then Lila's face, ghostly in the low light. Her eyes were hollow, her smile was unnatural, stretched too wide, too still. She said nothing. Instead she held up a handmade sign. Cardboard, red letters smeared like blood. It read, "You took him from me. Now I'll take everything." Then the screen went black. Rachel screamed. Mark, already half awake, bolted into the room. She showed him the video, and for the first time since the nightmare began, he looked like he might break. There was no denying what this was now. Not a game, not jealousy. This was a warning of something final. They contacted the police again. This time, the tone had shifted. The threat was clear. The child had been targeted. The evidence was mounting. Investigators took their phones, combed the house, and promised surveillance. A warrant was issued for Lila Monroe's arrest. But by then she was already gone. The address tied to her Uber Eats profile led to a rented apartment in a derelict part of town. When officers entered, they found it empty, but the walls were covered in photos, dozens of snapshots of Mark and Rachel, printed screen images of Eli at the park, at school, even through the window of their home. There were notes scrawled in the margins. "She doesn't deserve him. Soon, make them feel it." They also found a map, their neighborhood marked in red, a circle drawn around their home with the word F. That same night, Rachel awoke to the smell of smoke. She jolted up, choking on the thick haze filling the hallway. Mark was already shouting her name, his voice muffled through the rising heat. They scrambled through the burning house, flames already creeping along the floorboard. It was deliberate. Accelerants had been used. Someone had set the fire to trap them. They barely escaped. As firefighters pulled them into the street, Rachel looked back one final time at the home they'd built together, now crumbling in orange flame. The life they once knew had been reduced to ash, and somewhere, in the darkness beyond the sirens and flashing lights, Lila watched. The investigation deepened. Her name was entered into national databases. News stations aired her photo. A warrant turned fed. She became a ghost, a woman no one could find, but everyone feared. Rachel and Mark started over under new names, in a new state, living in fear that any stranger might be her. They never saw her again, not officially. but sometimes, a letter would arrive, no return address, just a single word on the card inside, remember, and every time they did,